What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Health is Hard podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Eichler, and I'm here to help you cut through the noise and find the strategies that actually work for building a stronger, healthier, more resilient you. As a seasoned chiropractor, fitness junkie, and founder of Element X Health and Fitness, I've seen firsthand how confusing and overwhelming the health and fitness landscape can be. That's why I've made it my mission to simplify complex concepts, bust myths, and provide you with actionable tips you can start using today. Each week, we'll dive into topics like optimizing movement, building muscle, bouncing back from injuries, managing pain, managing your mindset, and so much more. Whether you're looking to level up your nutrition game, fine-tune your fitness routine, or just feel better in your own skin, Health is Hard is here for it. I'll do my best to make even the most challenging topics engaging and relatable. I'm hoping you'll be learning, laughing, and leveling up your health every episode. All right, let's dive in. Let the brain gains begin. Remember, the information/opinions provided in these podcasts/videos is/are for entertainment and educational purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Right, welcome back. Health is Hard, episode 5, Sitting Kills, Moving Heals. Hey, tonight we're going to talk all about a bunch of different components to my new book called Empowered Movement. And I really feel empowered movement should be your number one priority when it comes to trying to make positive health changes. The book is going to be out by the time this podcast goes out. So I'm super excited for you guys to check it out. I've been explaining to people, especially my patients, as I'm talking to them about the podcast and whatnot. And I've really come up with this idea that these first 5 to 10 episodes are just going to be conversations I wish I could sit down and have with my patients. I wish I could sit down and talk about all these things and give them a better understanding as far as some of the more important needle moving health behaviors, some of the things to prioritize, how to not get lost in the minutia, and just really start to hit some of the main big themes that would make tremendous differences in their lives. So it's going to be something that is somewhat spelled out in that book as well, but I'm going to hit a ton of the topics in that book tonight. So just to tell you a little bit about the book, basically I wrote what I call the Chiro Companion Mobility Guide probably a year ago or so, maybe even longer. And that's been on Amazon. It's been for sale. It's only like $5. It's an ebook, and the ebook walks you through a handful of different ways to basically get mobile, stay mobile, and hardly need chiropractic type services, manual therapy type services, massage therapists, all those different things, because you've handled those things from a movement perspective. So I took that book that I already had and basically revamped it, expanded upon it, did a ton of exploring and expanding the ideas that were already in that book. And I really just put out a roadmap for how to get mobile, stay mobile, and then how to train your body to hold on to that mobility. So you don't need these repetitive adjustments and physical therapy treatments and passive therapies. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go. But I'm going to be reading some things from the book tonight. So bear with me if I'm looking at my computer quite a bit. But it basically is just a trail guide for human movement. Okay. And it breaks down a handful of different things. I have basically found that there's 2 or 3 big patterns that start to develop with people as they become more sedentary and they don't move as much, or even if they're hitting the gym, but they're not doing things in a balanced, intelligent fashion. Their programming's all off. They're hitting, like dudes that want to hit the beach muscles, and they neglect some of the stabilizing muscles that help keep them injury free. And that's what the mobility guide was supposed to be for. So I took that mobility guide and just went crazy with it. I put basically my entire philosophy on movement and treatment and just how to get mobile and how to stay that way. And mobility doesn't just come from stretching and loosening things up and adjustments. It comes from using your body in an intelligent way progressively through certain movement patterns over time. And if you don't use it, you lose it. Okay. So you have to maintain those things. Like I said, 2 or 3 big patterns, postures, those kind of things. We're going to talk about that, some of the nuances of posture and all that. Also in the book, I break down 4 main mobility restrictions that I find contribute to those patterns and postures most frequently with most people. So if you were to just do what's in this book, also the book has like a 30-day mobility program built right into it. It's an interactive ebook where you click on stuff and boom, it shoots you right over to a video and explains everything with my narration and everything. It has all the steps laid out to minimize those two main postures and patterns that I find contribute to a huge majority of my patients' issues. Matter of fact, almost every single one of my patients is getting some sort of take home habit, stretch, mobility drill, training modality to reverse those postures and patterns, almost every single one of them, because I am still like, it's rare for me to have somebody come in, especially when it's not a traumatic situation, like somebody didn't have just an abrupt injury. They just have some aches and pains from daily life. It's hard for me to find a patient that doesn't have these patterns involved in some way, shape, or form. So we're going to talk a lot about that. I'm going to break them all down, maybe in a little bit more detail than I should. But you'll have to pick up the book to get more of the details and more of a full understanding. But I'm going to cover a lot of it tonight. All right. So I did take that mobility guide and I wrote this book with it. But like I said, it's a major expansion upon that. But then I took that expansion into the book I'm calling Empowered Movement. And then I took about 2/3 of it away and reformulated the guide. So that Chiro Companion Mobility Guide is still available at the same place, elementxhfc.com. You can go there, you can get a free copy of that, which is just a scaled down, like I said, maybe 1/3 of the information that's in Empowered Movement. And also, that is like an awesome little freebie preview. It's like a preview. So you'll even see the table of contents in that has basically the Empowered Movement table of contents with a bunch of stuff taken out because it follows the same track, has the same ideology and whatnot. It's just way less in detail. Okay. So first big topic we're going to talk about tonight is we need a war on Seden-Terrorism. Okay. That's just a little play on words because we are such a sedentary culture. Now, that means lack of motion. That means minimal exercise. That means we're just kind of like going through the motions and getting through our day without any active use of our bodies. The sedentary habits of the USA and a huge majority of the world right now is such a problem. It's a bigger problem than most people think because it's been proven scientifically to contribute to so many of the modern diseases that we deal with. So, we're going to talk a lot about sitting, and I don't think sitting is the end all be all. It's just I don't think sitting is the only issue. That's for sure. Now we sit a lot. Okay. And we're going to talk about that, but we just got to move. We got to exercise. We got to prioritize diet and exercise and those kind of things more. It's crazy to me that most doctors don't start there. Diet and exercise. Diet and exercise tends to contribute to the remedy of almost everything in one way, shape, or form. But it's hardly ever addressed. And I almost wanted to, when I was building this brand, I almost wanted to just call myself Dr. Diet and Exercise because there's so much value there. There really is. And I actually did start an Instagram channel a long time ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where I was just doing diet and exercise protocols on Instagram, and I was trying to grow that. And then I just didn't really like how it was looking and the branding and whatnot. So I ended up scrapping that. But that's how committed I am to it, is diet and exercise. That's the main thing. Now I'm a chiropractor, of course, but I find that diet and exercise is at the root of a huge majority of the issues that I see progressing and then challenging my patients in one way, shape, or form to a point where now they need help, whether it's physical ailments, pain, aches, those kind of things, or it's some other major health challenge like an autoimmune disorder or something along those lines. Diet and exercise is going to help in almost every single scenario. Now, it's not the cure. Sometimes it is, but for the most part, it's a huge contributor to the resolution of a lot of those things. And if you want those things to stick and not come back, we have repetitive issues all the time. If we want to make those things stick, diet and exercise has to be a priority in our lives. I was thinking about the war on terrorism, right? In the last 20 years, this has been the highlight of my, political understanding in my life, is this war on terrorism. And I think the more important war is a war on Seden-Terrorism. Okay. Sedentary living is just a huge problem. And we're going to go into more detail on that. Okay. So, Sitting Kills, Moving Heals. That's a title of a book by a NASA researcher named Joan Vernikos. I think I've quoted her a few times in the previous podcast, but she was a PhD, researcher for NASA, and she explored all the effects of gravity and the effects on not having gravity for astronauts and just how it affected their health. Super interesting book. I have it on the shelf back here. I definitely considered picking it up because it's super insightful as to just how important it is for us to be resisting gravity and for us to be an active culture. But I used to think that this whole, sitting is the new smoking was such a corny phrase. And I was like, yeah, whatever, just like everybody else, they kind of brush it off like, meh, it's no big deal. But the more and more I see the effects of sedentary living in my patients and just in the overall health of just people walking around day to day, I would go as far as saying it's worse than smoking. It's far worse than smoking. There are so many health effects of being inactive and ill health effects of being inactive that it's mind-boggling. So I'm going to run through a few of those. I'm just going to read this here real quick. It's just a quick little quote from the book, but it says, "I know sitting is comfortable, convenient, and downright required at times. But here's the thing. Our bodies weren't meant to be sedentary. We were designed to move, to explore, to hunt, and gather our way through life. And when we spend hours on end parked in a chair, our bodies start to revolt." And that is totally true. So here's a couple ways that they revolt. And these are scientifically backed, just quick little blurbs about some of the negative impacts of sitting. So first one is about mental health. So prolonged sitting is associated with a 25% higher likelihood of developing depression. Bonkers, right? And we know, if you've been somewhat of an exercise advocate at any point in your life, you realize how much exercise can positively impact your mental health. Matter of fact, I think it should be required before some sort of psychotropic drug can be prescribed, is to make sure that patient is doing some sort of exercise. Exercise literally is an antidepressant. It's unbelievable. And this proves it. And there's a paper. I have an article on my website called Sitting Kills, Moving Heals. And it has all these facts I'm going to talk about here. And it shows the references and the scientific backing. Okay. So if you want to check that out, go over to drmatteicler.com, check out the blog. Okay. So mental health, big one. We're going to come back to cognitive function in a minute, but, the next one is lower back pain. Hey, that's my wheelhouse, right? I deal with lower back pain, chronic lower back pain every single day in the office. And, I can tell you a lot of inactivity, sedentary living, sitting is contributing to those issues. And right here, it says it's strongly associated with increased prevalence of low back pain. That was just a conclusion from a paper that's listed on the website. The next one's muscle degeneration. Now, I've talked a lot about muscle. I did a whole podcast a couple ago about the benefits of having muscle mass on your body, but sitting specifically is shown to contribute to muscle degeneration, which basically is like atrophy and like wasting away. Okay. So sitting for long periods of time can lead to muscle degeneration, particularly in the glute and leg muscles. Those glute and leg muscles specifically play a huge role in lower back pain. Okay. If you have strong glutes and hamstrings and legs, we can get into the nuances when I break down somebody's movement as far as like what exercises, what muscles they need to be focusing on. But I'm telling you, as a general rule, strong glutes and legs in general are going to help your back tremendously. Just think about the ability to bend and move and pick things up. And you are going to rely on those leg muscles so much that if you're just going to the gym and hitting some of the leg machines, let's say you're the most sedentary person ever, you don't have much time for the gym. Well, you got to get somewhere and work your legs a couple times a week. That could be as easy as going for a walk or going for walks. I would say that's definitely suboptimal. But if you could just go to a basic gym and hit some leg machines, I'm telling you, you don't even have to do any squats. You don't have to do any crazy lunges, nothing like that. You just go and you hit the leg machines. Okay. There's usually 3 or 4 of them at every gym. And you don't even have to go hard or heavy. Just, you got to maintain that motion. You got to maintain that strength in the legs. It will help your back tremendously. Okay. Next one, neck and shoulder pain. Prolonged sitting, especially with poor posture, we're going to talk about posture a lot later, is associated with an increased risk of neck and shoulder pain. Proven scientifically. Okay. So when people say that posture doesn't matter, well, here's a paper specifically peer-reviewed, evidence-based, that shows it is associated with these things. So when you have a guru online, like I just saw one the other day that said posture is complete bullshit, it's one of the biggest scams in the health and wellness space. I almost I wanted to unfollow him. Like, I like his content. He's got great stuff. I'm not going to name him. But that was the most ignorant statement I'd ever heard. I was like, oh my gosh, here we go. It's almost become this clickbaity thing to like attack posture, because it's kind of like this counterintuitive, because most people understand that like your horrible posture probably is not helping you in any way. Now, I understand that some people are trying to take advantage of that and monetize, all these posture braces and stuff like that. I get that. Some of that is a little gimmicky and not helpful. Okay, at all. However, it's ridiculous to say that posture is not involved in people's pain and their movement patterns and all these things. Last podcast, we went into crazy detail with that. I'm going to hit more of it today with more details, but mind blowing to me that you can say posture doesn't matter at all. It's a big scam. That's just like, that's super close-minded. And as soon as you say something like that to me, like as a physician of 10 years that's dealt with posture related issues over and over and over again, I just giggle, and now you've discredited yourself to me, because you're closed-minded, you're clickbaity, you're not trying to actually understand big picture thinking type stuff. And I might as well never watch one of your posts ever again. So there we go. There's my little rant. There's going to be more of those. So next category here, hip flexor tightness. Okay. Prolonged sitting can lead to tight hip flexors. It's common. It's super easy to theoretically understand this, because when you sit for a prolonged amount of time, you're in hip flexion. Your hip flexors tend to kind of adaptively shorten. They can 100% reverse as soon as you stand up. But years and years of sitting, those tend to slowly shorten. They tend to create all kinds of issues with the lumbar spine. Now, they're a complex muscle group, and it's not as easy as just stretching those bad boys to get things to loosen up and to help you out. But the hip flexors, they play a lot of different roles for spinal stabilization. They also play a bunch of different roles when it comes to contributing to some posture, some movement patterns, and some pain that's due directly or indirectly because your hip flexors are pretty tense and tight. And we'll talk a lot about that. Okay. The last one here I'm going to go over, and there's 10 more of these, I think, in the article online, is reduced cognitive function. So like brain fog. All right. When we don't move, we don't think clearly enough. Okay. So this is why it's crazy to me that we have these corporate jobs where we sit in a cubicle all day long. We don't prioritize any movement, and we expect productivity out of these people. It's silly. It's silly. We need to move. And another rant I could go on is how they try to take physical therapy or physical education out of schools all the time. I mean, there's all kinds of studies. There's specifically a few in the book called Spark by John Rady, where he compares kids that had like recess and kids that don't have recess and their test scores. And the kids that were moving more did better. What a concept. This body of ours almost is like an engine for this brain of ours. Like when we are moving our bodies, our brain works better. It's kind of obvious to me, but I understand it's not obvious to a lot of these people that are making the rules that allow to prioritize certain things in schools or in workplaces and those kind of things. And they don't really get that. So that's one of the things I'm trying to change. And that's why this whole podcast is going to be about movement and trying to prioritize movement, mobility, and how to do that. Okay. But the last thing I'm just going to say here, and like I said, more details on the article. But sitting in a sedentary, inactive lifestyle pretty much magnifies your chances of developing almost all the chronic diseases. First few that come to mind are heart disease, cancer, let's say Alzheimer's, depression. You could throw depression in there too, because that's like the leading cause of disability worldwide now. So between lower back pain and depression, you've pretty much covered almost all the disability worldwide. It's bonkers. So both of those are going to benefit from being more active. Okay. Side note, chronic disease. We talked about it quite a bit in the first few podcasts, but it's right now 68% of our healthcare dollars are spent on chronic diseases. Our healthcare model is not set up to handle chronic disease. Our healthcare model's basically reactive in nature, and it's meant to save your life. It's not meant to treat your chronic ailments and to allow you to have quality of life. It's just meant to make sure you don't die. And it's great at that. However, it's pitiful at managing chronic disease. Well, not managing, let's say curing or eradicating chronic disease. It's pretty good at managing it because it's super profitable to manage chronic disease, but it's not so profitable to cure it. Okay. So there's some money involved here too. But, I don't want to go off on that tangent too much. So what happens when we sit? We get stiff, we get deconditioned, we get weak, we get immobile. All right. Those things happen because we just adapt to not moving. We adapt to sedentary living. And when that happens, after a ton of complaining and just, not understanding why you're hurting all the time, once you get to a certain place, it's kind of an uphill battle to try to reverse out of it. And it totally can be done. It's not going to be done efficiently if you don't have some sort of a system. All right. Yeah. You got to have some sort of system, and it's got to be comprehensive. It can't just have a couple components. And then those couple of components are like what you're relying on, like a passive therapy or something. We're going to talk all about that later. And then you don't do anything on the active side. All right. We got to have a system in place, and that's what I've designed. And I call it the P.U.L.S.E system. And we're going to go into detail on what that is in a little bit. But basically we got to get our butts out of the chairs. Okay. We can't be sitting so much. We can't be super sedentary in general. Okay. It's not just sitting, it's the sedentary living for sure. But here's the kicker. Working out isn't enough. We need to move consistently throughout the day. Now, if you're hammering the gym hard and then you go sit for 15 hours a day or 12 to 15 hours, the average American sits 10 to 13 hours a day. It's unbelievable. But if you're hitting the gym hard in the morning, then you go sit all day, well, you haven't really done enough to reverse the effects of that sedentary lifestyle. So I do believe that if you hit the gym in a very methodical, intelligent way, you can put a huge dent in the sitting that you're doing outside of the gym, right? Or outside of your workouts and whatnot. But most people have no idea how detailed that can be. And that's what I've done with the Empowered Movement book, and even with the mobility guide a little bit. So you'll see that there's a system in place to basically get you mobile and then keep you mobile. Okay.
All right, listen up, you desk-dwelling weekend warriors. You know who you are. The ones who can't touch their toes without making a noise like a creaky old floorboard. Well, guess what? Your ticket off that pain reliever merry-go-round has arrived, and it's called Empowered Movement. Look, I've spent years cracking backs and wrestling stiff spines, and let me tell you, I'm tired of seeing the same faces coming back in with the same problems all the time. So I decided to write a book and potentially put myself out of business. Yeah, you heard that right. Now, this isn't your grandma stretching guide. We're talking about a full-on interactive ebook that's going to kick your duck butt into shape and handle that tech neck too. I'm giving you my secret sauce, my P.U.L.S.E protocol. It's like CrossFit for your mobility, but without the risk of ending up on those gym fail compilation videos. You'll get video demonstrations starring yours truly, a 30-day mobility program that'll make you more flexible than a politician's morals, and super practical strategies, many of which you could do during those pointless Zoom meetings. Just be sure your camera's off. Now, this isn't about quick fixes or turning you into a contortionist overnight. It's about giving your body the tools to stop betraying you every time you bend over to tie your shoes. Whether you're a desk jockey or you just have a bad case of the tech neck, banana back, whatever, this guide's got your back and your hips and your shoulders and your ankles. So you ready to tell your chiropractor it's not you, it's me? Grab Empowered Movement and let's turn that body from a creaky old hoopty into a well-oiled machine. Your future, much more limber self will thank you, but might curse me a little bit during some of these mobility drills. Links in the description to go grab the book. Thanks.
Basically, with that book, I've tried to put myself out of a job. Okay. There's always going to be people that need my help for sure, just because of the nuances and the details and the the sitting culture that we live in is just not going to be reversed like that. But I've tried to take whatever I could comprehensively to put together for somebody to where if they did these things, they would not need me nearly as much. Okay. And that's always been my goal. For some reason, since I started this whole thing as a chiropractor 10 years ago, I've always wanted to figure out how can I create something to give to people to where they don't need me. I don't know why. I've always felt that way. And I know a lot of people might think that that's kind of counterintuitive, but I've never been a chiropractor that wants to have to see people over and over again. I want to fix people. I want to contribute to fixing people because chiropractors don't really fix people. Every now and then there's like a one-off situation where that adjustment was just perfect and that's exactly what they needed in that time, in that moment. And then all of a sudden they took that and went and used it and boom, it seemed like a miracle. I've had that happen a handful of times. But most of the time it's because they followed that adjustment up with some appropriate movement and maybe they were super active to begin with and just had something a little bit shifted around and needed some help. But for the most part, I would say more than half of what happens when you go to a chiropractor is effective because of how you live outside of the chiropractor's office. Okay. And that's undeniable to me as I've done this for 10 years and seen thousands and thousands of different patients. Okay. So, like I said, though, movement transcends and includes exercise. So we need to be moving all day, every day. We really just have to find ways to get moving more. And I've got a few of those strategies. I talked about them in the last podcast, but I'm going to reiterate them here as some more tangible tips a little bit later. Okay. So, basically, where do people's aches and pains come from is the next topic I want to hit. And basically, movement problems that are non-traumatic in nature, where something abruptly didn't happen to you, typically happen because of us doing a certain thing, moving a certain way, where the demand of the movement exceeded the capacity of the tissues in their state at that moment. All right. Now that sounds a little nuanced but that's what I've seen. And that sometimes is due to faulty mechanics, due to tightness, stiffness, mobility, certain areas, stability in certain areas, or lack of those things. Muscle imbalances, that's definitely a thing as well. Or it could be a combination of all those. So, and these issues arise because of the repetitive nature of our day-to-day lives. Most people do the same things over and over again, day in and day out. And if nothing changes, nothing changes, right? Pretty solid quote there. I don't know who said that one, but common sense. But I really started diving further and further into what's jacking people's physiques up. And I started thinking about it from a number of different ways. And sometimes it helps to just think about aesthetically what jacks up somebody's physique. And I came up with a few things. And usually those aesthetic impairments or something that aesthetically is somewhat displeasing compared to what could be better actually has a huge functional component to it as well. So let's take a look at a few things here that I've considered the big things that kind of jack somebody's physique up. All right. So the first one's excess body fat. All right. Now I know this might be a result of years and years of, deconditioning and overconsumption, and it doesn't happen overnight, but excess body fat really plays a huge role in people's aches and pains and the pressure on their joints and their muscles and their ability to move. And that can really be a huge problem. So we talked a lot about obesity, I think in the muscle episode a few ago, but excess body fat, can't get around it. It's just going to have a negative impact on your physique and your mobility. Next one is actually terrible posture. All right. I just went on a little bit of a tangent a few minutes ago, and there's going to be more of those, like I said. But terrible posture, obviously, aesthetically doesn't look good. And there's all kinds of research on how certain postures can play with our emotions and also our state of mind. Amy Cuddy has a book called Presence that talks about power poses and different postures and how they affect our neurochemistry. Unbelievable. So again, posture does matter, and it matters a number of different ways. And there's so many different little nuances to think about when it comes to posture. But excess body fat, posture, and then I thought the third thing was kind of like this cascade of dysfunction that happens when we've had maybe a previous injury, which alters mechanics, and then those altered mechanics or lack of use of those mechanics because of pain leads to weakness, stiffness, instability, deconditioning, just a lack of physical resilience. Those, I think, are the three big things that jack people's physiques up. I have this little diagram I'm just going to run through. So it starts, I call it the pain, posture, performance, injury loop. I know it's a mouthful. I need to come up with a better name. Okay, so you start with an injury or a common ache or pain, and then that leads to altered regular movement mechanics. All right. Then those altered movement mechanics because of pain and irritation and those kind of things, starts to lead to a lack of interest in or an efficiency with exercise, strength training, those kind of things due to the difficulty and the pain. That leads to a weakness, stiffness, deconditioning of the body, which leads to postural collapse and eventual joint wear and tear because of the altered mechanics and the inefficient movement. And then that leads back into a injury or a current ache and pain. And it's just like this merry-go-round. We go round and round with this. So it just boom, 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 boom. And then it feeds back into it again, right? And then it just spirals out of control. So over time, that same thing leads to people being more sedentary because they just don't even want to try, which leads them to more of an unhealthy lifestyle, which then leads to excess body fat, obesity, and just chronic disease development. Okay. So you can see it's a big vicious cycle. And a lot of the contributing factors are these altered movement patterns. And a lot of times those start with postural collapse. So it can kind of go forward and backwards too. It's a crazy situation, but if you check the book out, you'll see the diagram and it makes sense. The next topic we're going to talk about is just some common postural dysfunctions. So I know I explained that as I'm writing this book and as I've been in practice for 10 years, I've noticed some major postural shapes, dysfunctions, positions, kind of default positions that people start to collapse into. And you're going to be familiar with these, but I'm going to go into the details as to how they develop, but also how they're so connected to so many of the aches and pains and common issues that people have that they don't understand why they have them. So I'm just going to read another quote here. And it says, dots kept connecting. As my pattern recognition got better and better, I was able to pinpoint some common patterns. And I call these patterns upper body dysfunction, or UBDFX, and lumbar pelvic dysfunction, or LPDFX. And I have a big diagram of these in the book and even in the mobility guide as well. So, and despite what a lot of arrogant fitness influencers on TikTok claim, there's a ton of research to these phenomena. So I'm going to keep reading. The first postural pattern I see too often is what I've dubbed the upper body dysfunction, because it involves basically the entire upper body. And it's a condition that sneaks up on us due to the demands of modern life, turning us into hunchback tech zombies. So first thing that happens is that your shoulders start to lurch forward. Muscles like the pec minor, pec major, subscap, and the lats adapt to a shortened position, causing the scapula to kind of round over and tip forward. And that closes down something called the thoracic outlet. This can irritate the nerves and the structures in the shoulder joint, leading to shoulder impingement, pain, injury, and all kinds of other shoulder issues, and even numbness and tingling down and into the arm. So then your mid-back starts to hunch forward, starts to hunch over, and your neck starts to protrude forward. Trigger points and weakness further develop in the upper back and neck muscles, causing all kinds of discomfort. The head translates forward, and your eyes feel like you're going to fall, prompting the activation of the posterior neck muscles right up at the top, to pull the head back up. All right. And this leads to all kinds of headaches, TMJ issues, vertigo, and I've even seen it cause like tinnitus, like ringing in the ears. All right. So now let's move south and explore the lumbar pelvic dysfunction, which develops usually because of excess sitting. Okay. The average American sits 10 to 13 hours a day. Think about that for a second. I mentioned it earlier, but 10 to 13 hours a day is insane, right? But due to prolonged sitting, the glutes weaken and the hip flexors tighten. That compresses the spine and stresses the lumbar discs to a certain degree. As this process continues, we become somewhat stuck in a seated position with a forward pelvic rotation, leading to hyperextension of the spine and the low back specifically, and starts to lead to something we call duck butt, right? Where the pelvis rolls forward and you kind of have this, like your booty sticking out and you have a super crazy arched lower back. You call it banana back if you want to. But this happens because the hip flexors tighten and shorten. And then as you try to stand back up, you end up in that position because your hip flexors are stiff. But the glutes and abdominals should prevent this, but they often fail to do so, leaving smaller stabilizer muscles to pick up the pace. And this leads to all kinds of aches and pains in the hips and those kind of things. So it's just a cascade of dysfunction. So over time, your core becomes pretty lax, your hip extension goes out the window, and then all of a sudden now your LPDFX, your lumbar pelvic dysfunction, kind of creeps back up and kind of collides with your upper body dysfunction, and it becomes this mess. Okay. I'm going to read this right here. People try to persist through this debacle and still hit the gym. They put their best foot forward, but often end up banged up and injured. They then blame the exercise, not their tornado torqued physique, and use it as an excuse to avoid the gym like the plague. Big mistake, right? But that's so commonly what happens. They have these issues. They go to the gym. They're not moving well. They're not moving efficient. And then they get jacked up. Now, trust me, just going to the gym and trying and staying in a non-painful range is the key to fixing this. Okay. But if you go hit the gym like crazy and then you don't realize that these things are affecting you, and then all of a sudden you get jacked up, you think, oh, I can't exercise, I can't lift, I can't do these things because I just get hurt. Well, you need some sort of a strategy in place to somewhat train intelligently so you're not overburdening tissues that you're probably already overburdening in your daily life. And you got to balance things out. Okay. And that's what we're going to talk about more later. But, the LPD, FX, the lumbar pelvic dysfunction has a handful of different components to it. I've got a diagram here. I'll run through a few of them. But we talked about basically what happens is the hips start to tip forward. The pelvis starts to rotate forward. We call it an anterior pelvic tilt. A lot of controversy around whether that's a big deal or not. But in the big picture, I think it is to a certain degree. But it definitely plays a role in this whole pattern. So the pelvis rolls forward. Here's a common thing that happens that most people don't think about: hamstring tightness. Okay. A lot of people think, oh, my hamstrings are just always tight. I can't loosen them up no matter what I do. Well, a lot of times that's because the hamstrings aren't tight. They're actually taut. They're pulled in a stretched position, prolonged, which creates kind of this tension constantly in there. Think about pulling a rubber band tight and holding it like that. That rubber band is going to get stressed over time. So when your pelvis rolls forward, it changes the pivot points of where your hamstrings attach, and it creates a mild stretch in them all the time. So that leads to a lot of chronic hamstring tightness, and it feels like you can't loosen them up, especially when you try to stretch. The key to that actually is to be foam rolling and massaging them and actually working them, contracting those muscles. But those kind of things lead to a shutdown of the glutes, which makes the pelvic tilt even more significant, because the glutes tend to put you, when you flex your glutes, it usually brings you into somewhat of a neutral posture in the pelvis specifically. So when you do that, now if you flex them hard and you try to almost like contract them maximally, well, it's going to put you in a posterior pelvic tilt, which is the opposite. Okay. But typically when you contract your glutes to a certain degree, it almost neutralizes your pelvis. It's like your glutes were built for you. So those glutes tend to put you in a very stable position when there's some sort of tension in them. So, if your glutes aren't working really well, then all those little stabilizer muscles pick up the pace. Things like the deep hip muscles. I call them those the rotator cuff of the hip. So things like the piriformis, we've heard about the piriformis a lot. All those deep hip muscles get really sore, and it feels like you have just like this deep, boring hip pain all the time because of that tension and tightness down in there. Again, that leads to your back hyperextending itself. As your back hyperextends itself, it compresses a lot of the joints together, which can pinch the nerves, can irritate the nerves. Most of the time, nerves don't get pinched, they get irritated. And then that can create muscle tension and tightness and constant soreness and fatigue down in the lower back. And then it spirals out of control from there. So a couple more things that happen, with the anterior pelvic tilt, it can contribute to some shear force of the discs in the lower back. It can lead to some hip issues, not just the posterior hip muscles that are trying to pick up the pace, but also the hips tend to internally rotate a little bit, which can create all kind of pinchiness in the hip, clicking, snapping in the hip. It can create a gluteal tendinopathy, and sometimes there's some muscles that should be doing some things that aren't, like your glute medius. They can start to get sore as well because they're almost in a chronic stretch all the time. So those glute medius muscles start to develop trigger points. Those trigger points can refer down the leg. That can actually be called sciatica instead of sciatica, but a lot of times people think it's sciatica, and sometimes I call it sciatica because it's like the side of your body with a bunch of muscle tightness and soreness in it that's referring down the leg. Feels like a nerve is entrapped, but it's not. It's just the musculature. Okay. One more thing is it also leads to your ribs kind of popping up like an open scissor look. And that can create all kinds of issues with your stabilization of your core, your diaphragm. It creates a dysregulation of how you're breathing to a mild degree, which creates all kinds of other issues when we can't oxygenate our tissues. You can see how this can get crazy. Okay. But a lot of these things stem from the same positional issue. And if we can work towards reversing that position, we're going to handle a lot of aches and pains and annoying issues that people deal with daily. Okay. But a little disclaimer on posture. I know we talked at length about posture last time, and I already have kind of gone off on a couple little mini rants about it. But posture doesn't really exist, right? It basically is a starting point for how you move. So it's basically the joints, all the different components of your body that come together to form a certain shape at a certain time, but it's just a phase of movement. It's a neutral phase of movement in that moment. All right. So the posture comes together to have a certain shape, and that becomes the starting point for how you move. So scaled down posture is just the different anatomy and how it's holding itself. Scaled up, it's movement. Okay. So insight as to how it does matter. It's not really what most people think it is. And it's not a permanent thing. It's something that's dynamic and changing all the time. We're never not moving. So just a little bit more about how those joints do come together, though. We talked a lot about regional interdependence in the last podcast. The last podcast went into a little bit more details of the joint by joint concept, which is basically this interdependent design that our bodies tend to have by default. And quickly, I'll recap it. So there's this relationship between mobility and stability, and we'll define those in a minute. But your foot needs stability for the most part. Your ankle needs mobility for the most part. Your knee needs stability. Your hip needs mobility. And it just continues to weave up the body. All right. So low back wants stability. Mid back wants mobility. Scapula wants stability. Shoulder wants mobility. It's just this beautiful design that if we aren't honoring it and aren't actually trying to move in accordance with our body's natural preferences, well, then we're going to have problems. So let's define a few things here. I know we did it last time, but mobility, stability, and flexibility. Okay. So flexibility, let's start with flexibility. Flexibility describes your ability to basically move with help, right? So if I was to stretch somebody's hamstrings, how far would they stretch before they stop, before I hit an actual anatomical block where they can't stretch any further due to the elasticity of their tissues in the moment, or a handful of different things. So that would be called passive range of motion. Now, mobility would describe your active range of motion, your ability to move on your own without any help. And that can change. We can change that. We can get stiff. We can also get more mobile via habits and certain things that help mobility. All right. So it'd be more your active range of motion. Stability is your ability to not move while something else moves. So let's think about like a certain region of the body that needs to be like an anchor point to where something else can move. So let's talk about the shoulder. All right. So the shoulder needs to be able to, the scapula specifically needs to be able to anchor down to the back to get appropriate mobility in the shoulder joint, specifically in the big ball and socket that we think of as our shoulder. But the scapula and shoulder work so much together, and the scapula tends to need to be stable in a lot of different positions. And if it's not, well, then it's going to affect the ability for the shoulder to move efficiently or to even have the mobility that it needs to have. So it's an interconnected, beautiful design. And I've literally, since learning this concept, I've almost changed everything about how I treat people, about what I have them focus on exercise wise. And I honor this system and basically try to exaggerate it with all the programming and exercise that one, I do, but also that I program and assist other people with. But like I said, if you have a mobility preferring joint, let's take the hip, for example, and that joint becomes stiff due to a lack of motion or a overuse of a certain position, or just a basically adaptation to not moving or an injury or something, well, then we're going to have to get mobility somewhere else, right? And a lot of times a neighboring stability preferring joint is going to give up some of its stability to give the requisite mobility to the section that can't move as much. And then things get sloppy, right? We don't have those nice clean anchor points that allow for us to move somewhere else. Things get kind of weird, and things just start to break down. It's kind of like when somebody calls in sick for work, and let's say you're running with a small team. I would say that this can happen at our office sometimes. Maybe somebody calls in sick. That happens. Totally. People get sick, right? But then a lot of times a certain staff member might have to do two jobs. And that certain staff member probably isn't used to doing one of those jobs. They're maybe not as efficient at one of those jobs. And they're definitely not as efficient at one of those jobs when they're doing their job and that job. And I know that a lot of people can probably relate to that because it happens all the time, right? Sometimes we don't have time to replace that staff member, or we don't have time to alter the schedule or something to accommodate for a lesser equipped staff. Okay. But that's kind of what happens in your body too. Something starts to not do its job, not show up for work. And then all of a sudden now other areas have to pick up the pace. Things get sloppy, things go awry, mistakes happen, injuries happen. Okay. So it's a beautiful design, but when you can use that design and understand it and program exercise around it, well, then you're going to be way more efficient at minimizing those little aches and pains that do develop when you are working out, or because you're working out from a disadvantageous position. Okay. And that would be like your starting point for how you move, or your posture that doesn't exist. I'm sorry. It can get confusing out here, but I've wrapped my head around this so many times that I've come to some solid core understandings that can be a little convoluted and hard to follow, but just hang with me. Okay. So when we aren't moving well because of all these compensations, well, now just sometimes our basic activities of daily living become difficult or almost injury promoting, right? Like, doc, I just reached over and grabbed a tissue box. Well, you reached over and grabbed a tissue box from a weird position from your back because your hips are super stiff. You have no ankle mobility. Your knee buckled when you did it. And then all of a sudden the compensation all the way up happened and something slipped or twisted or janked or, just got tight because it was trying to do the job of something else. And then that's how these little basic movements like, oh, I just reached over to grab a pen and my back went out, right? Those little things happen because of inefficient movement or deconditioning of the tissues plus the inefficient movement. There's a whole host of things that can be the problem, but this is at the core of it. Moving on. When we use that design, like I said, to program exercise and whatnot, we also have to understand that there's some basic fundamental movements that people need to be able to do to just be able to execute most activities of daily living for your average human. Those 6 movements are your squat, your lunge, your hinge. Hinging like deadlifting, lunging is like the gait cycle. And then the upper body patterns would be like your push, your pull. And you need to be able to pull vertically, horizontally, same thing with the push, and then carry. And the carry movement is super interesting because when we carry things, our body demands stability. If we're going to carry something and walk, well, we're going to have stability somewhere and we're going to have mobility somewhere. So this system kind of has to figure itself out. So let's say we're carrying a heavy dumbbell on one side. Well, what happens is our body wants to cave to that side. What happens is your core has to tighten and stiffen and keep you upright along with your shoulder packing itself down into a good position. So you're not caving your shoulder into like a weird position that pinches and hurts. So when we carry stuff, our body almost subconsciously figures it out. It has to figure out how to create stability. So carries are one of the most important core exercises, stability exercises. And actually, if you want to really improve your posture, just do a lot of carries. Okay. And if you carry things with a few little technical cues, you're going to be working on your posture, which is pretty cool. Okay. Time to ditch that chiropractor. All right. So I know this seems a little counterintuitive because I am one of those, but let's just paint a little picture for you right here. So repetitive adjustments, massages, and therapy sessions, you feel good for a little while and then the problem returns. Sounds familiar, right? As much as people believe this business model makes chiropractors happy, the good ones are so busy with new patients that they would like to get you to maximum medical benefit as quickly as possible. Because every case is vastly different, so is every patient's journey to what we would consider maximum benefit chiropractic care can offer them. Adjustments, massages, manual therapy, trigger point work, myofascial release, therapeutic laser, all those things are passive treatments.
Psst. Hey, it's Dr. Matt here. Listen up, because I've got a freebie that'll knock your compression socks off. You may have heard of my new Empowered Movement book. If not, oh well. Just know I poured a ridiculous amount of time into crafting that bad boy and it's out now. But the reason I mention that is because you can consider this guide the appetizer to the main course of mobility magic. Introducing the new and improved Chiro Companion Mobility Guide. It's like Empowered Movement Light, but don't call it diet. This bad mamma jamma has 40 plus pages of mobility goodness, and guess what? It's absolutely free. That's right, I'm practically giving away the keys to my mobility kingdom. Now I know what you're thinking, what's the catch, Doc? Well, only catch here is that you might actually start feeling good in your own skin again. Crazy concept, right? This guide is the Cliff Notes version of my full-blown mobility manifesto, Empowered Movement. It's got enough juice to get you started and on your journey from stiff as a board to smooth as butter. We're talking 2 of my top secret P.U.L.S.E protocols, the ones that'll make your hips and thoracic spine sing like they're auditioning for America's Got Talent. So if you're tired of feeling like the Tin Man before his oil change, head over to Element X HFC and snag this guide faster than you can say My back. It's your first step towards telling your chiropractor it's been real, but I'm going to take my spine back now. Hey, while you're at it, why don't you shoot me a follow on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. It's Dr. E Health, Dre Health, DRE Health. Who knows? Maybe you'll learn a thing or two. Plus, if you're digging the Health is Hard podcast, show us some love. Give us a rating, a review, do all the things like share, do all that stuff that the podcasters always ask you to do. It's kind of like a virtual high five that helps us spread the good word on all this stuff. Hey, remember, folks, motion is lotion, and this guide is your first squirt of that sweet, sweet mobility juice. Go pop your email in over at elementxhfc.com, and you'll be able to download it right away. I promise I won't harass you too much with the emails afterwards. I might just let you know about a few more things I got for you and keep you in the loop on all my projects coming down the pike. All right, that was way too long. Back to the podcast.
So passive therapies, things being done to you, most of the time, they're going to create temporary relief. They're not going to fix you, because it's a nuanced system. We have mobility and we have stability. We have motor control. We have all these different things. We need to be able to take those passive therapies and then use them appropriately and then kind of lock them in. And most people don't have a system for doing that. And most of the time it requires some sort of strength work. Movement is medicine. Movement is absolutely medicine. And it's hard to create mobility if the joint isn't going to move much beyond the treatment. Okay. It's like greasing a door hinge. It's like spraying some WD-40 in a door hinge, and then that door hinge doesn't move. You have to kind of move that door hinge to work that grease into it, right? People come to me all the time and they're like, your appointment, I am not missing my chiropractic appointment. You're the one appointment I'm not going to miss. And I sometimes I just kind of think like that's kind of crazy, because I am a chiropractor, but I rarely feel like I'm in desperate need of an adjustment. Hardly ever. I don't even get adjusted that often. It might be once every couple of weeks, once a month. I mean, I might go 5, 6, 7 weeks without getting adjustment. No big deal. It's not something I need all the time. Now, I like it. It can be helpful. It can be very helpful, but I don't need it. The reason why I don't need it, we're going to come back to in a few minutes, but it's not like a necessity for me. And it's because I move my body intelligently and in a balanced fashion consistently. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. All right, so here's a cool diagram I have in the book. I'm going to read it. And as a little preamble here, I want to explain that when I am doing anything, I want it to be three things. I want it to be effective, I want it to be efficient, and I want it to be sustainable. So effectiveness, efficiency, sustainability are my priorities with everything. Okay. If you don't have all of those in place, typically the habit falls off. The effort isn't as effective or doesn't produce the result you're looking for because it's not sustainable. Sometimes things take time, but let's just go into this diagram here. So effective movement equals the strength to resist gravity through those 6 fundamental human movements, right? We talked about those. Efficient movement equals optimal mobility, stability, motor control in the appropriate areas, which is the regional interdependence, the joint by joint concept that we've talked about a lot. Efficient movement consistently used is sustainable movement, right? So now we've hit effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability. So effective, efficient, and sustainable movement consistently challenged and used equals a strong, mobile, sustained muscle mass to the body and joint integrity. And then that feeds back into the effective, efficient, and sustainable movement. So that becomes a bit of a vicious cycle, or a beneficial cycle, I guess, because effective, efficient, sustainable movement consistently challenged and used is going to lead to strong, mobile, sustained muscle mass and joint integrity. And then that is going to you can tell you can see what I'm saying. It's going to feed back in and make everything even more effective, efficient, and sustainable. So this little cycle here is the most efficient route to building resilience in your body. And resilience in your body is going to lead to health and longevity. And that's where the magic is. Okay. So I understand and implement all of these things daily. Okay. And that is why I rarely feel like I need these passive therapies. It allows me to feel awesome. Okay. I rarely feel like, of course I have soreness and aches and pains and that kind of thing. Like pain, life is pain. Okay. We're constantly in pain, but I never have like this dying desire I need to jump on a chiropractic table and be all rearranged. Hardly ever. Okay. Now maybe I'm just lucky, and that's totally possible, but I think it's probably not as much luck as it is my consistent daily habits. So let's get into the system that we need to have in place for dealing with a lot of these mobility issues. All right. And I call it the P.U.L.S E system, the P-U-L-S-E P.U.L.E system. The P stands for pinpointing. And this is the most important part of the whole process, because we have to be able to pinpoint a posture or a pattern. Say there's a bunch of P words here that is creating the problem. Okay. And that's my job. That's where I flash back to a patient, where, I might be looking in a certain area and the patient's like, no, doc, it's on the other side. And I'm like, okay. All right, chill, Steve. Okay. I'm looking over here on purpose. All right. I know I didn't just mishear you. I'm still looking over here because there's potentially a problem over here as well. And that might be leading to the issue. There's levels to this game, right? We are compensation machines. And when we have mobility issues or stiffness or soreness or pain in one area, sometimes it's because we don't have stability in one area. Sometimes it's because we don't have the requisite mobility. Sometimes it's a compensation, or sometimes it's a combination of all of those things. A little quote from the book: people don't pay me because of my ability to unlock their tightness or their joints, or crack them here and do this kind of thing. They pay me to know where, why, when not to, and then for my ability to actually do it. Okay. So that's the biggest thing with chiropractors, is if we're just popping and praying, if we're just snapping, cracking everything, well, then we're like glorified massage therapists. Nothing against massage therapists, because they're great. But a lot of times there's no real doctor component to massage therapy. There's definitely tremendous benefit. Don't get me wrong, but there's no real diagnosis and actually like critical thinking and figuring out why something may be a certain way. And a lot of chiropractors fall into that too, right? The old flying seven. I'm even guilty of doing it quite a bit too, because people like it. People feel good. People, sometimes they just need a bunch of things released and loosened up, and then boom, they can kind of go do their thing from there. But if we're not like accurately figuring out why an issue is where it is, or you've developed a pain because of a certain thing, a lot of times we get slapped with a diagnosis. Oh, we got sciatica. Well, there's about 10 different things that can cause sciatica. So it annoys me. So, oh, it's my sciatic nerve. It's my sciatic. Okay, well, it could be your SI joint, your disc, the muscles in your lower back, the muscles in your hips. It could be your piriformis. It could be your capacity has been exceeded by whatever movement you're doing. It could be so many different things. There's probably 10 different causes of sciatica. Okay, it could be pinched nerve in the lower back. Could be a disc has shifted. Could be not shifted, but bulged or herniated. Or it could be you have a bone that's shifted forward. Spondylolisthesis is a really common thing, where you actually have something shifted forward that is creating a direct compression or irritation to the nerve. It could be that plus a disc that's gotten super inflamed. And now the inflammation from the disc is creating that pain that you think is sciatica going down your leg. That's called discogenic pain. So, there's 7 or 8 right there. Okay. There's a lot of different reasons why people can have things. So if we have a pain and it's right here, well, would it make sense to check some things around it? Would it make sense to check how things are moving, why you might have that pain right there? I'm not just going to go attack and rub this thing down for you, even though that's what most people are expecting. I'm going to figure out why it's there, or do my best to. Then I'll go ahead and do some things. But I kind of want to have an idea as to why you keep ending up with this repetitive issue. Sure, you could have some tissue damage, could have a torn this, torn that, could have a ruptured this, or but maybe it's just because you've got some imbalances that have created a chronic kind of irritation to one area because there's lack of stability or mobility or something else in another area. Super common. What's that? I think it's Ida Rolf. Who was it? Perry Nicholson that said, where the pain is, it ain't. Like, simple, right? Where you think the pain is, it ain't. I think that's funny, but it's pretty commonly the case where, where people are having pain, the source of it is not necessarily there. And it's not a direct referral, but it can be because this has become a movement discrepancy or compensation or overburdening of certain tissues because of a problem elsewhere. So super common, but that's why good chiropractors are in business and also fix people, is because they're able to take it a couple steps back and take a look at the cause of the problem and then address that as well. Address the symptoms, but also address the cause, right? And that's the key. So that's the pinpoint portion, right? For the mobility guide and for the empowered movement book, the pinpointing has already been done. Okay, I've already done that because I find that there's a couple of these patterns that can be about 80 to 90% of what I see in my office probably. So I've already pinpointed that pattern and a lot of the issues that come along with it. And I've designed the rest of this process for 4 major groups of dysfunction or mobility restrictions that people need to address to help deal with those. But the way they do that is the next portion of P.U.L.S.E, and that's called unlocking. All right. So unlocking can be releasing, can be doing a handful of different modalities to do this, but it's nuanced and there's different components to it. And when we just jump on a foam roller or do a stretch, that's not always covering the bases. So basically, we want to look at it from a hierarchy. And the hierarchy for me is movement, joint, muscle. Okay. Now, the movement that is restricted is most important because there's a lot of neurology involved in achieving a certain position. So, if we can mobilize tissues, whether it's a stretch or something, in the position that we're trying to achieve, well, that's probably going to create the best results. Now, that involves we do something for the joints and the muscles in that area, but I try to do it in that order because of how the neurology works. So, the movement is priority. The joint is the next priority because there's more neurology in and around the joints than there is in just the muscle bellies. So when we stretch or do those things, if we can get to the joint and loosen up the joint that's affected, then, and now of course the joint is influenced by the musculature and, the muscle moves the joints and whatnot. But the joint has a ton of neurology in it. And if we can free up the joint restriction, but then the muscles sometimes kind of come along with that. All right. So we're not just trying to look at things from a muscle perspective, like, oh, I have tight traps, or, oh, I have a tight levator scap muscle, or, oh, my hamstrings are tight. Well, why are they tight? We got to understand what joints those muscles cross. We understand if those joints are hung up and those muscles are tight for a compensatory reason. Maybe they're trying to hold you in a certain position for a certain reason because there's a joint that's out of position, or there's a certain movement that's just unachievable because of that joint being out of position. So it's nuanced, but we want to focus on movement, joint, muscle. Okay. Not just thinking about just the muscles, like, oh, this is tight. So we want to think about all of it. All right. So when we unlock something, if we can unlock it via some sort of self myofascial release or a joint distraction or some sort of myofascial therapy, or even like mobilizing into a certain position, like the movement, like sometimes, let's take this for example. What's the best warm up for squatting? The best warm up for squatting is probably to do some light squats and get into the position you need to get into lightly, safely, start working your body, start greasing that groove, start to get into the position that you're going to try to get into with a load later. All right. So maybe some air squats, maybe some lighter squats, some warm up sets, 2 or 3 warm up sets. Then we're going to start maybe loading the tissues. That's going to be the best warm up. That's going to be the best way to unlock and to release a lot of the tight tissues that are associated with that movement. Okay. Then we can get into more nuanced situation where, okay, now we got a restriction. Maybe we can't get into that position. Well, now let's figure out why. What joints and muscles are involved in why we can't get into that position. But if we can, sometimes we just need to do it over and over again, repetitively, to try to retrain the system in that moment and be prepped for that. So we've got pinpoint, unlock. Now we need to stabilize and strengthen or even stimulate. It's kind of a handful of different ST words. And that involves loading the tissue. Now it involves loading the tissue in a strategic way. So if we have something super tight and we unlocked it, well, what was causing it to be tight? Well, you don't have to get into those details because that sometimes requires some professional help. But most of the time there's something on the other side that might have been a little unstable that was contributing to the lack of mobility. So let's take a classic example of, let's say like anterior shoulder pain and the shoulders rolling in and them being very tight. Well, sometimes people want to attack what's rolling the shoulders in, which is usually like your pecs, your bicep, maybe your lats, your subscapularis a little bit, those kind of things. Okay, go ahead and attack those, loosen those up. Try to loosen it up in the movement you're trying to get into. Try to do some foam rolling, maybe some lacrosse ball action, those kind of things. Boom. Now we're unlocked. But now that we're unlocked, let's try to lock that in by stimulating and strengthening and stabilizing something on the other side. So now let's take like those scapular stabilizer muscles that pull your shoulder back into a better position, and let's fire those up a little bit. Let's stimulate those. Then let's stabilize the movement, and then let's work to strengthen those over time. Okay. And that gets us into the next one. So the next component is the E portion. The E portion stands for empowering, empowering or training that maneuver. So now we know what created the breakdown. We had a pinpoint of what was going on. I did that for you for the sake of this guide. Now we're unlocking some things. Now we want to stimulate and strengthen some stuff on the other side. And now we want to empower that entire pattern by training it and training it in a safe, consistent manner. So this whole process allows us to use it so we don't lose it, but not abuse it. That's kind of my quote. Use it or lose it, but don't abuse it. All right, so quick recap. The P in the P.U.L.S.E stands for pinpointing a pattern or a posture or a position that is the problem. Okay, a lot of P words there. Unlocking is the next phase. So the UL is unlock. All right, that's where we're going to stretch, mobilize, massage some sort of tight joint structure or tissue that's contributing to the issue. All right, then S is stabilize, strengthen, stimulate, stabilize, strengthen. Okay, a lot of ST words. All right, and then the next phase is the empowerment phase, where we're going to exercise or train that movement consistently to make sure that we make it stick and then we use it or lose it. So a little quote from the book I wrote: "Dang, doc, I thought you were just going to show me some stretches. LOL. Not if you want to make anything actually change." Another thing, kind of on that same thought stream, is when somebody comes in and says, "Doc, why is it always the same thing? Why is this every time I come in here, it's the same issue? Are we not fixing it? Are we not getting it? Are you not getting it, doc?" I roll. So I wrote, "Well, Steve, you probably do mostly the same things every day, like we mentioned before. So it makes sense that these patterns re-arise, right? And good on you. You've been stretching, but did you think about doing anything after the stretching to help the stretching stick?" Most people are like, "Well, no. I mean, what am I supposed to?" So just not every mobility improving attempt needs to go over the entire pulse system, right? Trust me, I'd rather you just be stretching and doing nothing else than nothing at all. However, if you want to make effective, efficient, and sustainable mobility changes, this is the roadmap. The pulse system is your roadmap. Let's go into some tangible takeaways here. The first tangible takeaway that I want you to understand is we just got to move more. Movement is medicine, and here's how. We've hammered this home, but let's try to get 8 to 10,000 steps a day. That's huge. Walking is super underrated. We just got to walk more. Get a dog if you have to. Holy cow. I'd like to see a study on people that have dogs and people that don't have dogs, especially dogs that like to walk, and just look at their health. And I bet body fat levels are different. I bet overall caloric expenditure and a bit and joint integrity is different. I bet, because people that have dogs tend to have to move more. All right. Another one of my little hacks is to take a big jug of water with you almost everywhere. Okay. No, you don't have to look like one of those bros that's carrying their gallon jug of water all the time, but you just basically, by killing water all the time, clearly you're going to have to go to the bathroom. Right. So if you have more of a seated job and you're constantly cranking water, well, then you're at least going to have to get up and go pee from time to time. And that's going to keep you moving. Right. It's like common sense, little brilliant hack where we're killing a bunch of birds with one stone, because we're getting movement in, we're getting hydration in, we're moving consistently, we're breaking up the workday a little bit so our brain turns on and we don't get that brain fog type thing when we're not moving enough. So that's another little hack. So try that. And then Joan Vernikos, the Sitting Kills, Moving Heals lady, the PhD researcher for NASA, she calls them G habits. Just try to move more. Just take the stairs when you can instead of the elevator or the escalator. Park further away from the grocery store and walk. Take micro breaks, even if it's just to get up, turn your neck, turn your back, and stretch out a little bit, and then sit right back down. 15, 20, 30 seconds maybe is enough to keep the body moving, right? You gotta develop some sort of an active lifestyle programmed into your sedentary life. It's not hard to do when you just look for more little opportunities to move. Call them G habits. Okay. So we also need to move better. Here's another tangible takeaway. Here's how to move better. Okay. We need to do some intentional body maintenance, right? We don't need to necessarily follow the entire pulse protocol, but just some stretching and some light body maintenance, maybe a few times a week, 3-4 times a week would probably be way better than not doing it at all. All right. And remember, the areas that prefer mobility of the body are where you should focus those mobility efforts. So your ankles, your hips, your thoracic spine, which I'm going to take you all the way through the pulse protocol for the thoracic spine here in a minute, your shoulder, and your cervical spine, or upper cervical spine specifically. Those are the areas that really need to maintain mobility because they prioritize mobility in our daily movements. The other ones that are in between all those tend to prioritize stability. Okay. So let's go through the thoracic spine pulse protocol. All right. I call it the old hunchback turtleneck. Okay. That's when we kind of fold forward, head juts forward, shoulders round in. This, I'm going to take you all the way through the pulse protocol just briefly so you can kind of understand how to efficiently and comprehensively address this. And then it has to be done consistently, right? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to unlock some stuff. Now, when it comes to unlocking any of the tight tissues or releasing the tight tissues, I prefer a couple different things for myself, but in the book, I tend to rely on more intentional stretching and foam rolling. Okay, so I'll just hit some quick foam rolling guidelines here for you. So when you're foam rolling, you've probably seen a foam roller, the big foam like tubes where we kind of lay our body on and flop around on them a little bit. But they're meant to create a pressure wave, and they're meant to release tension and tightness via that pressure wave. So what you want to do is you want to roll on the hot spot and or whatever you're trying to improve, and then you'll find these little micro spots that are way painful, and then that's where you know you've hit a spot that you need where you need it. So typically when you get on that hot spot, I want you to slowly breathe into that hot spot and just make little micro oscillations on that specific spot. Usually 30, 40 seconds of doing that, breathing, relaxing into it, embracing the pain, embracing the suck a little bit is important. Pain is okay sometimes, like we talked about a lot in the last podcast, but just allowing it to hurt a little and breathe into it. And as you do that, usually it starts to soften and release and lighten up a little bit. Typically by the time it starts to not hurt as much, well, now you know you've done something in there. Okay. But yeah, just use your breath. Typically 1 to 2 minutes total with the foam rolling is going to be really effective. All right. And then the next thing I really like is like an oscillatory and also like banded distraction stretching. But the banded distractions can be a little hard to get good at. So we'll talk about those at a later date. But when you stretch, I like to get into a position where I'm going to stretch. Let's say I'm going to stretch my pecs. I'm going to get into like a doorway and I want to sit into the stretch and maybe exhale. When you exhale, your body tends to relax. And if you can get into a position and all of a sudden now you're stretching something, but you can't breathe, well, that's totally counterintuitive because your body's going into fight or flight mode to tighten right back up. So when you stretch, I like to get into a stretch for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, exhale one good time, and then come out of the stretch and then go back into it, right? So it's like an oscillatory. So it could be like 10 repetitions of a 2 or 3 second stretch to get you to 30 or 40 seconds. You want to exhale. You want to relax into the stretch. And then by oscillating, you're kind of moving as well, right? So you're kind of training what that muscle is going to do. Hardly ever do we just sit in a stretched position. So why would we do that to try to improve movement? Doesn't make any sense to me. So these little oscillatory movements and stretches, taking the joint or the muscle to its end range. So let's say with the pec, I'm going to lean into that doorway and kind of let that door frame pull my shoulder back and open up the chest. And then I'm going to hold for a couple seconds, exhale, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to go in and out of it. Okay. One of my other favorites is like the hip 90-90 stretch where you're in a 90 degree position with both your hips on the ground. And with that one, I oscillate back and forth, like not even an exhale. Like I'm going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm not bouncing into the stretch, but I'm kind of slowly getting into it and backing off, slowly getting into it and backing off. And most people, once they try this, they understand, oh man, that does seem like it would be way more effective. So that's just how I prefer people do what I would call intentional or oscillatory stretching. All right. So the thoracic mobility pulse protocol. We're going to pinpoint some stuff. I've already done that for you. We're going to unlock some stuff. We're going to stimulate and strengthen some stuff. And then we're going to empower and train some stuff. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through one of the diagrams / tables that's in the books and show you just kind of by reading it what's happening here. So it says unlock, execute steps 1 through 5, 3 times a week for the first 4 weeks. The first one is a self-myofascial release technique. It's called the 3-way T-spine foam roll. I have videos of this on my YouTube channel where you're basically going to jump on a foam roller. You're going to lean over it in 3 different ways. And by doing that, You're going to foam roll some stuff that helps unlock the T-spine from getting all stuck and matted down and contributing to this hunchy upper back posture. Just going to do that for 30 seconds each spot, and there's 3 different spots. Okay. The second one is going to be a mobility exercise. It's kind of like a oscillatory stretching, which is going to be a lying T-spine rotation exercise where you basically lay on your side. You're going to open your shoulders up almost like you're opening a book. Probably going to hold something between your knees. You're going to face one way and then you're going to open the other way. If you just type in lying T-spine rotations, or sometimes they're called book openers on YouTube, you'll see what I'm talking about. All right. And this specifically in my mobility guide and in my empowered movement book, there are clickable links and thumbnails. And as soon as you click it, if you have it on your phone or if you have it on your computer or whatever, it takes you right over to a YouTube video of mine explaining everything. Okay. So it's an interactive ebook. All right. So those 2 things, we're going to do 2 lying T-spine swipe repetitions, or 2 sets of 10 repetitions on each side. Okay. Now we're going to get into stimulating and strengthening some things to help open that up, but also lock in some of the mobility that we just did. So with the first one here, step 3 is going to be an activation drill. One of my favorites for this is called a Y roll. You're going to lay on your stomach, and then what you're going to do is you're going to do 3 sets of 5 where you're basically having your arms out in a Y position, and you're just trying to pick your arm up and roll to the other side of your body. It's kind of hard to describe that one, so you might want to just check that one out on the YouTube channel. Okay. The fourth one is going to be an integration exercise where we're doing all these things together actively under our own power. And that's where I love a walking world's greatest stretch. Basically what you do is you're going to lunge out. You're going to sit deep into a lunge position. You're going to put one hand down, and then you're going to rotate your thoracic spine and neck up the other direction, where you get this crazy Spider-Man looking exercise. And I want you to do that 2 sets of 10 meters each way. So that would probably give you 7 or 8 dynamic stretches each set. All right. So I know this might be hard to picture via the podcast, but if you know about the world's greatest stretch, you're in the know. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. But it's a great exercise to integrate all these things that we just tried to do. And then I have, for a strengthening maneuver here, I have something called the shoulder health quad set. Plus, I've added banded chin tucks because you can use the same band that you're using for the quad set for some chin tucks. The quad set, it consists of an over and back exercise. Then it consists of a pull apart. And then it consists of a face pull with a band, with a super light band, one of those big pull-up assist bands, but there's different strengths, obviously the variability in people's strength. And then the fourth one is what I call a serratus punch or row. It's an interesting exercise that for some reason really helps my shoulder stability, and I've seen it help a lot of people. It's very basic. This 4-part set, you would go through 2 times 8 reps of each specific maneuver. So it's shoulder health quad set. And then I use that same band, wrap it around the back of my head, and I do those basic banded chin tucks where I'm resisting my chin back against the band. Those 5 exercises, holy cow, would clear up a ton of people's upper body dysfunction, given they don't have a major tear or injury or tissue insult of some sort. Okay. So that's the stimulate and strengthen phase. Now we're going to go into the empower and train phase. So this, I'm just going to read, it says, choose exercises 1AB or 2AB or similar versions of your liking, and perform these 3 times a week for the first 4 weeks, and then program this exercise into your regular workout program, probably at a lesser frequency, and then hit it more consistently that way. Okay. So 1A and 1B, well, 1A is a face pull, and a face pull, you can do it with the band, like we were just talking about, or you can do it with a rope and like a rope and a cable setup. There's a specific variation of a face pull I have dubbed the posture pull. It's on my YouTube channel as well. You can see how the posture pull just takes what I would consider this upper body dysfunction and stimulates everything required to reverse it. So it's a really effective exercise for this situation specifically. And then we got to have some sort of like pretty significantly loaded exercise where we're building some strength. We're accumulating some volume on the other side of what's making us tight in the front, or what's creating this postural issue and this lack of thoracic mobility. So one of my favorite things for that would be a chest supported dumbbell row, where you lay your chest on a inclined bench, and then you take some pretty heavy dumbbells and you just literally row those bad boys right up to you, and you try to squeeze those shoulder blades together real hard, and you create some strength in your upper back. But a couple of 2A and 2B. 2A is a single arm cable row where we're actually trying to promote some thoracic rotation, but we're building strength in the same breath. And then 2B is a machine row where we're actually grabbing the machine and we're just squeezing those shoulders down and back real hard. And there's plenty of different machines in just about every commercial gym for that. It's a no-brainer to be accumulating some volume on the backside of our bodies because we usually have so much tightness and tension and overworking of the front side. Okay. Quick little training tip. I have at the bottom of this page, it says chin tuck everything. So chin tuck is basically where you pull your chin straight back and you're trying to almost create a little bit of a double chin. This actually extends your upper thoracic spine. It kind of flexes. It's called deep neck flexion or deep cervical neck flexors are the muscles that you're using when you do this. But what happens is that you pull that curvature into your neck by basically extending your upper T-spine, and then you're basically pulling the chin back, which stimulates those muscles to put a little bit better curvature in your neck, but you're actually flexing your neck forward. You're not extending it backwards when you look at the nuances of the actual exercise. So those little chin tucks that usually everybody's done in some sort of neck rehab are actually super important. And I actually prefer when you set up to do any exercise in the gym, almost any exercise in the gym, think about the last thing before you initiate the movement, do a little chin tuck. Your head's not going to help anything hanging out way out in front of you. Like I do it when I bench press, I find my head jutting forward a little bit, but you can actively weave some rehabilitation into your workouts if you just think about tucking that chin a little bit each time you set up to do anything. It's universal. There's hardly a movement where having a little bit more cervical spine stability, especially in the lower portion where these deep neck flexors mostly work, that's not going to benefit from that a little bit. It might not be completely like a prerequisite to achieving the motion specifically, obviously, because people do people do stuff all the time where their heads are hanging out in front of them. But a little bit of chin tuck, kind of deep neck flexor activation with every exercise is actually weaving rehab right into your normal workouts. And it's preventative for a lot of the neck pain and irritation and headaches and all those things that happen when we sit a lot or we live in more of a sedentary type culture. So chin tuck everything. Okay. Now we got to empower and train like we talked about, but there's plenty of different options for that, right? You don't have to do those ones that I talked about. I'll just run through. I have 8 more here that are fantastic for that whole training, the T-spine mobility, T-spine extension and mobility that we're trying to achieve here. But something like a back plank, this is an interesting exercise. You've probably never heard of it, but basically where you put 2 chairs or benches together and then you push your elbows into those, lift your whole body off the ground by pushing in. It's basically like a row. It's basically like a row with no equipment. All right. Super creative exercise. I love it for people that don't have access to a gym or something. How about like a Smith machine barbell bent over row? Okay. Or like a Smith machine bent over row. You could even do a banded bent over row where you step on the band just right and you lean straight forward like you would with a barbell and you just pull the band straight up, squeeze those shoulder blades together. You could do a low cable row where you have the low cable handle set up on a cable station. You're just squeezing the shoulders down and back, not necessarily down and back, but straight back into retraction. And then you could do like a seated single arm row, like you did with the cable in the actual protocol. There's all kinds of hammer strength row machines. Basically, we just need to accumulate some rowing volume, and specifically rowing in a horizontal fashion is even better because I find that a lot of people don't realize that the lats, when we do an overhead pull, like a pull down, the lats contribute a lot to internal rotation of the shoulder as well. So when we work the lats like crazy, maybe we do just lat work for our back where we're pulling things down like a lat pull down. Well, that actually can contribute to the same position because it's accumulating a lot of volume and internal rotation, just like we do with almost everything else in daily life. So we need to do more horizontal rows than vertical rows. I say when people do their programming for exercise, they should think about doing like a 3-to-1 pull to push ratio. And then also within their pull workouts, they should do a 2-to-1 ratio of horizontal pulling to vertical pulling. So we're doing a whole lot more horizontal type rows to help open up the posture, help stimulate and strengthen the back, help accumulate some volume there. So we're balanced. A couple more, face pull, posture pull, single arm dumbbell row, those kind of things. Those would all be helpful. I have videos of all of those in the book specifically. There's no thumbnail for those where you can click and go right to it. However, you can just go to the channel and you can find like a little tutorial video on all those. Okay. So let's just recap the pulse again. Again, we pinpoint some stuff. That's all been done for you for the sake of these guides. But we want to pinpoint, and then we want to unlock something. After we unlock something, we want to stabilize and strengthen something. Usually the antagonistic muscles that are kind of taking the day off when we're super tight elsewhere. And then we want to empower. Usually we want to find some sort of integration type exercise where we can do that without even really thinking about it, where it's actually stretching. Let's say like a quick example, let's say like a dumbbell press. Okay. When I do a dumbbell press or when I do dumbbell presses, I emphasize this stretch. So I want to get that stretch. I actually will actively squeeze my shoulder blades together as I'm pulling the dumbbells down. I mean, of course, gravity is assisting me, but then I'm squeezing, I'm stretching, and then I'm pressing, right? So that would be a great exercise for empowering, trying to release the chest and tightness in the front, stimulate the back muscles, and then kind of do a movement where we're using that whole process in a loaded fashion, which is going to empower the position we were trying to achieve, the mobility we were trying to achieve. And then now we're going to take that, maybe that empowering exercise, and we're going to train it consistently. Okay. That's the P.U.L.S.E protocol. Unlock, stabilize, strengthen, empower, train. So it's a beautiful system. It's a comprehensive system that I feel like I've really taken a lot of time to put together, and a lot of thought has gone into it. Okay. A few more tangible takeaways before we wrap this up. So we want to maintain and strengthen those 6 fundamental human movement patterns. Okay. And those were the squat, hinge, lunge, the push, pull, carry. If we're prioritizing those when we do our exercise, then we're going to find that a lot of these things that I've already talked about kind of correct themselves. If we're going to the full range of motion to our best ability, and we're training those under load, doesn't have to be super heavy, just a little bit of load. Even body weight would be okay, because if you accumulate some body weight volume, you're going to fatigue those tissues. Maybe once or twice a week for each one of those patterns: squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, carry. All right. That's going to cover a ton of bases. So here's a sample workout split that I would prefer for somebody. Okay. So like let's say it's a 6-day split, and there's going to be some off days in here. So a split is just basically somebody's workout schedule for the week. Okay. So day 1 is an upper body day, and let's focus on horizontal push pull, like exercises, more pull to push. All right. And then also we're going to do some carries. So, and this is obviously strength work that you would do at a gym, or, body weight or whatever. Okay. Day 2 is a lower body day. We're going to hit the squat and the lunge. And the lunge is basically a single leg squat. Right. So we're going to do mostly just squat lunge on day 2. Day 3, we're going to take off, or we could do some cardio. That would be great to keep the ticker ticking. All right. Day 4, we're going to do upper body again. Now we're going to do a vertical push pull, again, emphasizing the pull. We're going to do more pull downs and more, like pull ups and those kind of things than we are pushing, but we're going to do both. All right. And then maybe we'll do some cardio on that day too. Day 5, we're going to take off. We're going to make day 5 an active rest day, where we're going to do maybe a little prehab, a little bit of an exercise routine. Maybe we're going to run through one of those P.U.L.S.E protocols. Maybe just do some banded stuff that's going to be a certain portion of that P.U.L.S.E protocol. But we're going to focus maybe on mobility and not necessarily as much strength. But again, like I've explained, you can't really separate them. You kind of need both. So just an active rest day where maybe you're focusing on some mobility work. You're going for a little walk, doing some cardio, that kind of stuff. And then day 6, we're going to hit lower body again. Maybe we're going to do more hinge type movements on this day. And we're going to hit the core a little bit as well. And the core, when you hit the core, the carries are hitting the core, but maybe you want to do some additional core work. So that'd be a great 6-day split. 7th day, I would just take off completely. Don't even think about the gym. That way you get a little rest from it. Okay. So that would be an awesome little split if you were trying to design your own little workout schedule. I know so many people just don't even want to work out because they don't know how to set up their workouts. They don't know what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. They don't want to get hurt. They don't want to look stupid because they don't know what they're doing. But, 2 upper body days, 2 lower body days, and, a push pull, squat lunge, another push pull, and then a hinge. Fantastic. That would be so much better than probably 75% of people that are in there just aimlessly hitting stuff because it feels good, or because they think that that's what they want to work. Right. That would be a way more balanced approach to your strength training or your workouts. One of the things I do now specifically is outside of the office. I also do some little movement consults, and I help people through injuries and those kind of things without actually having to see them. And that's because I usually can hear from their symptomatology and then understanding of all the different pattern recognition that I have over time, what they're probably dealing with. As long as it fits under the umbrella of not having some sort of major tissue damage, well, then I'm going to take them through their P.U.L.S.E protocol. Like I'm going to make a P.U.L.S.E protocol for them. I'm going to pinpoint what their problem is. I'm going to figure out how to unlock those tissues, program some things like some targeted self-myofascial release or some passive mobilizations of some sort that they can do on their own, maybe some intentional stretching like we talked about. So that's going to cover the unlock portion. Then I'm going to program some stimulation, strengthen, stabilization exercises. Okay. These would be kind of like some corrective exercises, people would call them, where you could use these as just a warm up for whatever you're doing. And just maybe a proactive type of corrective exercise routine that you stick to as your warm up for your workouts. And then that's going to obviously have some movement pattern activation involved too, depending on what kind of workouts you're doing or what specific movement you're focused on that day. And then the empower and train phase. So that's when we want to find the specific pattern that's going to empower your efforts on the mobility side and on the stability side. And it's just going to be something that's going to almost integrate the two. That's an exercise you're going to do consistently. And that's basically putting those corrective exercises to work. So we're using them and not losing them, right? And then we're just going to train. Right. So the last portion of this is training. And usually if there's an injury that we're trying to recover from, I usually will create 2 specific workouts and have that patient or person or client do one of those workouts early in the week and one of those workouts later in the week. So for this example that I have pulled up on my computer right here, this is Dan from Denver. He basically was having lower back pain, and I basically programmed him a workout / corrective routine that went through unlock, stimulate, strengthen, empower, and then training wise, I designed him 2 lower back kind of lumbar pelvic stability workouts. They were actually like mini workouts that he could do as part of his workout he was already doing. So there was a lumbar pelvic stability workout A and a lumbar pelvic stability workout B. And lumbar pelvic stability B was somewhat of a progression of workout A. I know this sounds super convoluted and crazy, but that's how I use this service of not even having to meet somebody, just being able to maybe have a Zoom call and talk to them and figure out what their issue is, and then program them this whole pattern for reversing it to the best of their ability. Now, not everybody gets fantastic results because some people have tissue damage and stuff. And I can't, if I feel like that's the case via somewhat of a, let's not call it diagnostic, but kind of a hunch by talking to them, well, then they might need some imaging work. They might need to get to a certain provider. And that's actually, there's a lot of value in that too. I call it provider triaging, because some people will be going to the chiropractor for something they should be going to a physical therapist for and vice versa, right? Some people will be hammering a physical therapist when maybe they just need a couple adjustments plus some decompression and the appropriate stability work. There's a lot of value in just not wasting your time, making sure you're getting to the right place. Because not always is the practitioner going to say you're in the wrong place. They want you as a patient, they want you as a client, then they're probably going to do what they can do for you, even if maybe you need something else. Right. And sometimes they're not even thinking about what else you might need. They're just thinking about what you need in my office specifically. And I understand that. Trust me. Some people just aren't taking those extra steps to critically think about the person in front of them and figuring things out for them. Right. No big deal. No shade on anybody else. It's just, it's just somewhat of a limited thinking, if you ask me. So let's recap the whole podcast here. Okay. I'm just going to hit a couple bullet points. I'm just going to read them. Okay. Sitting and sedentary living might be the single most detrimental thing to your health. Seden-Terrorism is a problem. Sitting kills, moving heals. And just sedentary living is a huge problem. It's way more detrimental than I think a lot of people assume it is, or even, give it credit for. Okay. When we're sedentary, we get stiff, deconditioned, weak, and immobile, which is basically a shortcut to chronic disease, obesity, and a crap quality of life. Totally. I agree. Obviously, I agree because I put this together. All right. Relying on passive therapies such as adjustments, massage, PT, laser beams, sharks with laser beams, you name it, can be helpful, but it's rarely going to make a long lasting change. And it shortchanges you all the benefits of the more active therapies and establishing a solid, consistent exercise routine that focuses on strength in the appropriate areas. That's a mouthful, but I couldn't agree more. I don't know why I'm saying that because I made these. But lucky for you, big picture thinking allows us to tease out some consistent postures, patterns, and shapes, and we can proactively work towards preventing those through understanding how to move and exercise better and then consistently doing it. Yeah. So my P.U.L.S.E protocol, it's a system that was born out of a necessity for understanding and achieving effective, efficient, and sustainable mobility and strength. So if you're finding yourself with a lot of stiffness, tightness, and irritating repetitive aches and pains, snag the Empowered Movement book or even the mobility guide. That's somewhat of a major abbreviated version of the book that's going to be available by the time this podcast is posted. So I'll put a link down in the description of the podcast. So I laid out some protocols here, specifically in the mobility guide, the Chiro Companion Mobility Guide that's free. And those are the ones that are most relative to chiropractors, which I would say are thoracic mobility and hip mobility. Okay. And those are, the whole P.U.L.S.E protocol. The whole P.U.L.S.E protocol is in those. If you go to elementxhfc.com, you should be able to download it. Okay. You'll pop your email in, it'll take you to a download page, and then you should be able to download it right away. All right. Again, it's interactive, clickable links. If you click on something, it'll take you over to a YouTube video, and almost everything that looks like a thumbnail in those guides is a clickable link, which will pop you right over. So it becomes like a program as well. Okay. One last thing, I want to read this again. Effective movement equals strength to resist gravity through the 6 fundamental human movements. Efficient movement equals optimal mobility and stability woven throughout the body and in the appropriate areas. This is regional interdependence of the joint by joint system. Efficient movement consistently used equals sustainable movement. Effective, efficient, and sustainable movement consistently challenged and used equals strong, mobile, sustained muscle mass and joint integrity. That feeds back into what I just said, and it becomes like a positive cycle. Okay. But that strong, mobile, sustained muscle mass and joint integrity is the key to and it's the most efficient route to building resilience in your body. Okay. Resilience to those daily stressors, or even the one major daily stressor we're talking about here, sedentary living. Okay. And resilience is your key to health and longevity. Health and longevity is your key to more years of life and more life in those years. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Health is Hard podcast. I hope you found some valuable tips to help you on your journey to a healthier, more fit, more resilient version of you. Remember, building a stronger, healthier you takes time, and I'm here to support you every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend who could benefit from the goods that were in this one. Be sure to check out the show notes for resources and a special offer from our sponsor, Element X Health and Fitness. As a listener, you can get my free 83-page Chiro Companion Mobility Guide when you visit elementxhfc.com. That's Element X, H as in health, F as in fitness, C as in culture. If you have questions, suggestions, or just want to connect, find me, Dr. Matt, on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. E Health, DRE Health, and Twitter at DREX Health. Let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for being part of the health and fitness culture we're building together. Keep putting in the work, stay consistent, and cheers to making health a little less hard today.